All right, let's get started. This is how restful is your rest. For those of you who are not local, welcome to California. It's beautiful weather today. It's a little hotter than expected. Very unusual for San Francisco. But my name is Abdel Rimani. My handle on Twitter is Polymathic Coder. This is a little bit about me. I'm a software architect at Just Me. I have been speaking, and this is my probably 4 times speaking at Java 1. I speak at other conferences, big open source advocate, and I founded and started a bunch of users groups along the years, a Java users group, a Spring one. My Twitter handle again is Polymathic Coder, and that's my email at the very bottom if you're interested in emailing me. And if you'd like that information, I can give it to you again at the end of the talk. This presentation is licensed under the Creative Commons, so use it as much as, just don't, as long as you don't make money off of it. And as long as you're nice enough to cite that it's my work. So before I start off, I want to disclose to you guys that you're not going to see a lot of code in this presentation. If you're here to learn how to build REST web services using JAX-RS or using any other technology, this is not the talk for you. That's going to walk you through the APIs and walk you through all those annotations. This is a design. This is a talk that would walk you through how you would do things right in a way that is a little bit abstracted and independent of any of those technologies out there. So the first thing that I would like to talk about, in the next few slides, is define what an API is. An API, application programming interface. I'm sure that 100% of you in this room know that already. But we would say that you have an API when the functionality of your system is exposed in the form of a well-defined interface of services that are externally accessible, whether to everybody else or whether to other component within your company. And that these services have to be programmatically consumable through some kind of protocol. This could be only calls or method calls within the language itself. And we would say that you have a web API when the functionality of your system is exposed in the form of a collection of web services and that are publicly accessible through a set of web endpoints, URL at this point, and are programmatically consumable through the HTTP protocol. So why bother? Web 2.0 again. Web 2.0 brought in a lot of technologies that made access to data very convenient and standardized it in a way. What this did is all that data and those services that were just sitting there made them accessible to everybody and caused this explosion of web APIs. So we have location-based weather data and social data, government data, and everything is accessible for us to use all of a sudden. What did this is it gave birth to this new type of hybrid web applications that we called mashups that would go and combine all of these services to create value added for the user, aggregate and visualize all these data in a very interesting ways. And it resulted in this spoiled user base that demands a lot more than a single service can offer. So we have me at one end. I want to see the closest Moroccan restaurants to my current location on a map, along with consumer ratings and whether any of my friends has recently checked in the last 30 days. And stuff like that. Another thing is mobile. We have right now a lot more apps than browsers out there. In one mobile phone, it's not usual to have somebody install 30 or like 35 or even like 50 applications that they actually use. Mobile traffic is diminishing web traffic exponentially. We could see that reflected in the problem that both Google and Facebook are having right now in monetizing their traffic because they're not 100% model. They're still looking at looking at their users as people that actually sit down on a desktop and use the browser. So you can think of mobile as Mashup 2.0, right? So now your goal behind exposing an API of your organization is not for people to use your service uniquely or like for you to give people an application on their iPhone to conveniently use your services. But your goal should be for your service to be mashed up with other service. And it's 100% beneficial to you because it will drive traffic in your direction and it will allow you to learn a lot about your own service and how they are being used. It would expose the things that the user really want, and that need for them, that need to create that mashup. It would make you realize whether that's something that is included in your vision you want to improve your product to include or not. And it will also create a lot of goodwill with new potential users. If I'm a user of LinkedIn and I happen to come across another mashup that uses Yelp for some reason, I am going to kind of get a relationship, maybe install the Yelp application later on because I actually like it, because I got that exposure through that mashup. But what this implies is that the majority of traffic is not going through your own app or your website, but it will be through that API that you expose, which make the API, which make your application is the API, which makes your API the most important thing in your application itself. So the challenges that we face, that these implications bring, is that you have very little control on how your API is being used. You do not have control how your services are going to be orchestrated or used in combination. And that once you expose that API for everybody to use, it's there forever. The minute you have customer number one using your API, you can't change it anymore because you want to be backward compatible, or you're going to piss a bunch of people off that are spending a lot of money consuming it. So you better get it right the first time. So getting it right, what makes a good API? I did a lot of reading out there. I've written a bunch of web services and libraries out there, but there are like things that the most important thing that I learned is that an API must be very easy to learn and use. How can we do that? Is we want it to be intuitive. You know, the principle of the least astonishment. You don't want to go too cute and do something that is out of the ordinary. You want anybody that you would give him the API kind of figure out a way how to use it, like an iPod. Give it to a 5-year-old, kind of finds its way to it. And you want it to be consistent. Consistent by basing it on standards that everybody else knows and uses already. And if there are no standards, you want to adhere to a very strict conventions that you would document. And you want it also to be hard to misuse as well. And you want to make sure to have really good documentation out there. Well, this presentation is about REST. So I guess we're going to have the slide to tell everybody what REST is, not that you haven't heard it already. But REST stands for Representational State Transfer. This came out of a dissertation of Roy Fielding. The link is on the slides if you're interested in reading it. Practically chapter 5 mainly, and chapter 6 is pretty good. And the dissertation was titled The Architectural Styles and the Design of Network-Based Software Architectures. So what REST was about leveraging the web as a platform in creating this architecture that is based on the HTTP protocol with certain goals. First of all, we want something that can scale. We want something that has interfaces that are very, very generic. We want something that is independent, that has independent component. And we'll have something that has these intermediary components that will deal with cross-cutting concerns, like the fact that we want to put a load balancer in between our users and our servers, or want to improve performance. So we want to put some kind of caching server in between. So he came up to achieve those goals. He came up with a set of constraints that we should work within to make to call our APIs RESTful. And these constraints are as follow: that this must be a client-server architecture in the sense that the server can be changed independently from the client itself. And it should be stateless conversion. No state is maintained between sessions. It should be something that is cacheable. And it should have a uniform interface. And this is the most important thing because while writing code, that's what you're going to have to deal with, is the creation of a uniform interface. We're going to drill into that later. And it should be a layered system, as we talked about. I mean, you have your load balancer and your application servers and such. And there's this thing called code of demand that he said that it's very on demand. He said it's very optional. This is something like, executable code, downloadable code from the server that can be executed on the client like a Java applet and whatnot. So the main part of the presentation is API design. See how am I doing in time, time-wise? API design, right? So there is, for you to say or like to realize how RESTful your API is, Richardson came up with this REST maturity model for you to judge the maturity of your API. And the Richardson's maturity model is 4 levels. 0, which to say that you are completely not REST. Level 1, which is you're a little like RESty. Level 2, which is, you're kind of REST. And level 3, which is where some of us or a lot of us wants to go, right? So before we drill into the details of Richardson's maturity model, I want to present to you guys with this address book application, this API that we're going to design during this presentation. It's a simple address book application allows users to manage their contact info. User has a username and is associated with a set of contacts. And a contact is constitutes of a unique ID and name and a phone number. We have the requirement in the form of user stories. We want to add contacts, view all contacts, view a specific contact, modify a specific contact, delete one, and we want also to email a specific contact to somebody else, right? So, according to Richardson's maturity model, if you are in level 0, if you are only using a single URL, that means, and you are using a single HTTP verb to expose this functionality or this piece of functionality as a web service, right? So what you would want to do if you desire to be level 0 is you want to go and identify all possible operations or functionality that you want to expose, and you want to indicate what kind of operation you want to do in the payload, right? And you're only dealing with one endpoint. An example of that would be a SOAP-based RPC web service. When you have one endpoint for that particular web service called address book, and you have some kind of a description language, WSDL in this case, that would pretty much describe all the operations that is being offered through this particular endpoint. Like I have a method called add contact of Bob, or like in the address book of Bob, of Abdel Rimani with this information, look up all contacts, edit all contacts, delete contacts and such, mark as favorite. So the point is one URL, right? And your operations are specified in the payload. Good old SOAP. That would be level 0, right? So moving up, making things a little better, would be level 1 of Richardson's maturity model, right? And in level 1, you would be leveraging multiple URLs. That means that per method, per functionality that you're deciding to expose as a web service, you're going to have a URL, and you're going to encode all those operations, their parameters and everything in the URL itself. And you'd end up using a single verb because you're just pretty much getting that URL. It would make sense in the next slide. And level 1, the example that we use or what it is URL tunneling. So if I want to add a user to my address book, I hit the URL www/addressbook, which is my service right there, and /add contact. And this is where my operation is. So on level 0, we had that in the SOAP body. We had that operation in the SOAP body. Right now, we just moved that to the URL. We did like add contact. And then we provided all the data that is necessary to carry this operation as query parameters, right? All that kind of stuff over there. So what advantage does this pretty much give us is you can just hit port 80 and then you don't have to worry about firewalls or any of that mess, right? So the problem with this is it violates the fact that GET should not be used to change state. That GET is a safe operations in all of those web services out there that implement HTTP. or I mean, there's a term called idempotent. So it violates that because when you hit that URL with get, something changes in the service. So it's not the greatest thing out there. The next one is level 2. Level 2 says only that you have many URLs and you leverage multiple HTTP verbs out there, right? If you are at level 2, you might start calling yourself RESTful at this point, right? What this involves is it involves that you're going to have to create this uniform REST interface that we were talking about that was bolded at the previous slide when we were talking about what REST is, right? So the next section, or actually most of this presentation, is going to be focused around creating this uniform interface based on the HTTP protocol so you can call yourself REST. So the first thing that we want to do on the first portion of this one is you need to actually identify what your resources are, right? So a very simple trick to do that is to just lay down all your use cases right there and try to go and find all the names or like all the nouns of that particular use cases that you have, all of them. This could be a simple job because a lot of these things will be not very much like the same way as you would create a domain model for your entire application. You look at your entire user stories and find the nouns. Sometimes all of them are explicit. Sometimes some of them are actually implicit. In our case, we have two nouns. We have the concept of the business concept of the noun of a user, and we have a contact. So we just went and made a bunch of circles around all of these guys, right? So after we identify our resources, we say that we have a user, and this user is uniquely identifiable by a username, and we have the concept of a contact that is uniquely identifiable by an ID, all right? So now what we need to do is create a URI namespace for these resources that we just identified. We want something that they could be uniquely referred to within our application with our own API, right? So first thing that we want to do is we want to start with the URIs that would identify the collection of resources of the same kind, right? So for users, we just started doing /users with an S. This is very important, right there, that you include an S there by convention. You might have a different opinion, but that's okay. And I forgot to disclose that. A lot of the stuff in these presentations are just my own opinions and the convention that I decided to adopt, being as close as possible to any standard out there, whether it's relevant or not. Because there are no standards yet. So, and then we have /users and /contacts as two URIs that would refer to the collections of resources of the collections of users and collections of contacts, right? The next thing we want to do is we want to actually go and create URIs for the individual resources within these collections, all right? So let's assume that there is a user of this application called Abdel, somebody whose username is Abdel, right? So what you would do is you would do simply /users /Abdel, and this would point you to the user whose username is Abdel. We do the same thing for contact, and we say /contacts with an S /123, and this would supposed to point within our applications to that particular person or that particular entity with that ID, right? So the next thing is that if you've created a system, there is always this association between these components. Right? There's these relationships that get created naturally, all right? So you want to ask yourself the next questions after you identify these nouns and you created these URIs. Is there any association between any of our resources? So the answer here is that a user has many contacts, and that a user is kind of the parent resource of a particular contact. So we model this and we create this URI by using what we call chaining resources together, right? That slash that you use within a particular URI implies a hierarchy. So right now we found one. So to be able to refer uniquely refer to the contact whose ID is 123 and whose owner is the user, whose username is Abdel, we use the following: /users/Abdel/contacts/123. All right? Great. So next time is that we ended up with actually two URIs referring to the same entity and same contact resource whose ID is 123. All right? We have /contacts123 and we have /users/Abdel/contacts123. They're both pointing to the exact same resource. So is this right? Is this good or not? So it depends. You should ask yourself the question, very important question, can a contact resource exist independently from a user resource? Within your application, can you ever have a contact just floating around that is not associated with a particular user? And for this particular use case, no. So what we do is we go in and we cross over contact/123, right? And then we refer from now on to the contacts by their username they are associated with and their ID as well. These are really important questions that you might want to ask yourself. And you want to have the minimum number possible of URIs right there pointing to your resource, because that's just going to make your life a lot easier, right? So this is we've built we identified the resources. The next thing in building a uniform interface is leveraging the HTTP verbs, right? And going back to our user stories, what we're going to do again is just going and actually underlining all the verbs at this time, all the verbs that are in our user stories. So I have add here, I have view all, view a specific, modify a specific, delete a specific, I have email a specific to a friend, make a specific, mark a specific as a favorite, right? So this would be the equivalent, if you are building this application, it will be the equivalent of identifying the methods who are going to be a part of your service layer, all right? So now we have them all. Before we move on and go back to the example, I want to let you know that actually CRUD operations, which is read, create, update, and delete, are something that can be mapped to your HTTP, that are mappable to your HTTP verbs. So every time you're reading a particular resource, right, you would use a get. Every time you're creating a resource, you would use a post. Every time you are updating a particular resource, you would want to use a put. Every time you're deleting it, if you want to delete something, you use the delete HTTP method, right? This being said, right, to view all Abdel's contacts and fulfill that particular use case, you would do get/users/Abdel/contacts, and you would get the collection of contacts that Abdel owns, all right? If you want to view one, all you have to do is just do /123 and use get as well. If you want to add a new one, you would need to use the post method and add it to users/Abdel/contacts. If you want to update it, you would use the put, but this time you would update a specific resource, 123, not a collection in this case. And if you want to delete a contact from Abdel's address book, you would delete /users/Abdel contacts 123, right? So here's a problem right now is that not all, we have Nonquad operations that do not really map to HTTP verbs. In our case, we have two of them. We have emailing a particular contact, and the second one, we have marking somebody as your favorite, all right? So to email Abdel's, our solution for this one is to use descriptive verbs in your URLs and what we might call our controller calls, right? So it is okay for you in that case to do users, Abdel, contacts with an S123, email, and then you would use a query parameter to indicate who you would want to email that particular resource right there. So we're emailing the 123 contact that Abdel owns to Sandy at polymathiccoder.com. Marking Abdel's contact, whose ID is 123, as a favorite will be done through a put right here, users, Abdel, contacts, 123, mark as favorite. Notice two things right here. A lot of us would be very tempted to use a get operation right here, right? It is wrong because if you use a get operation and you change the state of that particular resource, you are violating the fact that get should be a safe operation, and that can be called as many times as possible, and the state of the server is not going to be changed. So what you want to do is you want to kind of use put to convey that particular operation, right? So the next thing I want to talk about, which is kind of going a little off of a tangent, is a convention for your URIs, for your URLs, all right? So keep in mind that URLs are case sensitive, right? And using, uppercases and lowercase is just going to introduce a lot of confusions for you and for your users. So what you want to do is just use everything lowercase all together, at once. So you don't even have to create that confusion. I mean, you don't want / users with a big U and somebody else is calling it with like a lowercase u, and they're completely different resources as far as HTTP is concerned. So avoid caps at all. My opinion. So another thing is links are usually underlined in browsers, and a lot of us would end up using underscores, and there are nothing wrong with using underscores. But the problem with that the underscore would be right above the underlining, and it becomes really hard to read. So you can avoid that and just start using hyphens from that point on. So you see right here, instead of mark as favorite as one word, to improve readability, I used hyphen, and I did not use camel casing camel casing instead. So the next thing of creating this uniform interface is what is called or referred to in Roy Fielding's paper as resource representation, right? So for any resource or a resource that is identified by the same URI, right? We want this to be represented in the form of a MIME, and we're talking about representation in the form of a MIME type. JSON, XML, whatever, data, even comma separated value, whatever makes you happy, right? That's the kind of representation that we're talking about. But for you to have a RESTful API, you want to support multiple data representation, right? And give the user or the client of your particular API the ability to say, return me this particular resource as JSON, or return me this particular resource as XML, or anything. You might not support every type in the universe, but that's completely, you're going to respond accordingly, but you want to have that capability built in. And my favorite way of doing it is to using the accept HTTP header and sitting the MIME type out there to explicitly for your client to say, give me XML or give me JSON. I hate file extensions. Avoid using file extensions. A lot of people use them, like .json or .xml. Avoid using those. It's just my own opinion. A lot of people tend to favor that as well. For ease of, I'm probably being right now a little too dogmatic in as far as REST goes. And also what you want to do is want to support the manipulation of these resources through different data representations. You want to be able to add to a particular collection and give the client the capability to give you XML or give you JSON or give you anything else. And he would indicate what's the exact MIME type by specifying the content type in the HTTP header, right? So the last thing that I would like to talk about is leveraging HTTP status codes as a feedback. And a lot of us don't do that. But there are a lot of them. There are like pretty much 5 families, the 100s and the 200s for success, the 300s for directions, the 400 for client errors, and the 500s for server errors. This is a short list that you might want to be aware of and kind of use in your API to give feedback. The 200 OK is something that you would use to indicate the success of a particular operation. if somebody hits your API to say mark as favorite, you would return a 200 OK as an indication for the client that the operation that he or she requested was carried successfully. But at the same time, a 200 OK might be able to return an error in the body. It's completely okay for you to give 200 OK with a JSON body or an XML body saying that this operation was not carried and here is the error, as long as you document that. There are a lot of them. You would return a 201 created if you post in response to any post to a particular collection. Accepted is, let's assume that you expose this web service that would start or kick off an asynchronous operation. So the best way to say that the operation, the asynchronous operation was kicked off successfully is returning a 202 accepted. Bad request is bad request, all right? Unauthorized, forbidden, you're familiar with those. They're on security. Not found, let's assume that somebody did /user 9997. I do not have that particular ID. I would return a not found with a 404, and in the body I would say that that particular media or that particular user or contact is not there. It was not found in my database, right? Method not allowed, not acceptable. Conflict, for example, somebody was trying to do an operation that would cause the server to go into an inconsistent state, and precondition failed. If you require that operation 1 has to have API 1 has to be called before API 2, and somebody called 2 before, you might want to say, a precondition failed. You're trying to do something that that is not possible right now, given the current state. Enough. I'll bore you guys with this slide, and let's talk about the level 4, the RESTful of the REST, which is HotEos or HATEOAS, or I can't say it. But what this stands for is for hypermedia as the engine of the application state. And what this pretty much says is modeling the business workflow and capturing the different state of a particular resource, right? And using the different possible endpoints to transition from one state to another one, all right? And what this pretty much entails is very simple. Let's assume that we have this business process. I'm going to make up something right now. Hopefully it would make sense. So forgive me in advance that an employee needs to be hired. And before we hire this particular employee, before he starts working on day one, he needs to go through some kind of HR process to make sure that this guy has the proper work authorization to work in the US, wherever it is. We have this application, this API that is being exposed for start working or pay this guy. All right. So first of all, we hit the first API to kind of say that we're interested in the guy. All right. The second API says that complete the work authorization document, and the third API is start working. Right. So if you go and hit the second API that says complete work authorization, what you get back is you get a link to start working, all right? And if you go and you you start working, you get like another link of, fire this guy or promote this guy or demote this guy. So what it is depending on the current state of the resource itself, the server responds with a series of links given the other possible APIs that can be called given that particular state. Because if you go and hit start working without complete, if somebody did not complete the document and hit starts working, you would respond with saying that, precondition failed or something like that. All right, it won't make much sense, and you would get a link directing you back to the state that you're supposed to complete before proceeding. And this is a simple state machine. So for the sake of being brief and to disclose that you don't really have to go and take things to level 4 and go to this extent to call yourself RESTful. This is very beneficial if you're doing system integration right there. And this is very good if you have machines consuming the APIs that you are exposing. It's very beneficial that way. The next thing that I would like to talk about is it's not enough to say /users, /abdel, /contact123 and get all that JSON right there. Sometimes we have a very deep hierarchy of objects, and you don't want to dump 50 megs of JSON on the user once. You have 1 million records on your data, on your contacts database. And this guy is very popular. Guy has so many friends, and we can't do that. We can't afford that server load. So something that comes to mind is to just paginate, right? To allow the user to paginate and only give people, the data that they actually need. So how do we deal with pagination and create these URIs without violating the REST principle? A lot of people out there are doing it differently. Twitter is doing it differently than Google and such. But one thing that I hate and that you must not do is /page/1, because the slash implies a hierarchy. And we're talking only about a subset of the data, a subset of the user, not page 1. Page 1 is meaningless. It's just like defining that particular page. That's one. Two is that if this guy keeps adding contact, his page 1 of today might not be page 1 of tomorrow. And especially if you are mobile and, you went to page 1 and the next day you decided to actually click the next button, which takes you to page 2. You get all this confusing data that is completely inconsistent. So some people do it inspired by the way SQL does it by using limit as a query parameter. And remember that you always want to hide all this complexity behind this little in the query parameters behind the question mark. You would say limit 20 and offset 20. That means from number 20, give me 20 records from that point on. I don't think it's enough. So I was going through all these standards and specifications to find the way that would be most intuitive and most natural. And then I stumbled upon RFC 5005, which is feed paging and archiving for like Atom and all of those things, for syndication. And all these people use, and they found these little terms that they use. They use the concept of next. They have next and previous, which is very good because if you're paginating, you also want to have some sense of direction, all right? And they have this concept of item, all right? And so I decided to start using those. Again, this is not a standard. This is my own opinion. So it would be very natural for me to say /contacts, then give me the next 20 to item, and this is the ID of the contact, and it would say whether it's inclusive or exclusive, right? So my pages are kind of not dynamic, but they're anchored, and they are relative to the actual item. I want the next 20, I want the previous 20 in relation to this particular item, right? Not page 1, page 2. That thing I really hate with passion, but a lot of people are doing it out there, which I forgot who's doing it, but you'll come across them. Too many of them. But anyways, the next thing that actually matters that you might be interested in when you're dealing with collection is the concept of ordering, sorting, and filtering, right? So in ordering, because when you get a collection, it would be ordered a certain way, and sometimes they won't matter to you, but sometimes you would actually care, right? So you would say like ordered by popularity, sorted as descendant, or ordered by first name and sorted as ascending. So when you actually go and read your URI, it makes perfect sense to you. You say, give me this one, ordered by this one, descending. I want the previous 20 to item this and that. So you would read it as English. It won't be confusing. Your API people, the API clients will love you and they're going to start using your API because that's the goal again, right? Filtering. Filter by is a generic one. Filter by, I don't know, people who have like 20 years of age, whoever it is. I honestly don't have an actual solution for that one, but you might include a filtering expression inside filter by, right? The next thing is the concept of views. And I borrow this term from SQL, like in the views of tables. And And what you want to do is you want to support custom views of the data at the schema level, right? So, and you want to use some kind of an easy expression to do that. It happens to be for a particular, you have this user, it has all this information, it has his account data, it has his profile data, and all of this stuff. But you know that whoever's going to be using your API is only interested in the first name and last name. So what you do is you would give him like a named view and would say, give me only a profile extract. So you would do /users and you would query and say, you know, view, give me a brief, which only is going to have their first name and last name, or give me a full view of the actual resource that I'm interested in, and these are predefined, right? You want to also support these custom views through, this is no bueno, so can you help me out, get the charger up? So hopefully this won't turn off. Anyways, so you would assume and let the user to actually cherry pick and say, in this resource called user, I only want first name and phone number, or I want everything but last names right here. There is no standards out there. A lot of people are doing it differently. LinkedIn, in particular, has a very sophisticated expression language that they actually parse and do themselves. Thank you. Are we good? Max saved the day. So, yeah. Anyways, one thing that you might want to keep in mind is supporting legacy clients. There's always these people that drag. It's 1%. Right now using IE 4.0, whatever it is. No, but that don't have support for all the HTTP methods. All right. I personally say let them go to hell. You know, forget about them. But, you know, some of you might be a lot more, you know, benevolent than me and say, all right, we got to take care of these guys. We can't let them out. We can't keep them out in the rain. And the way you would do that is actually add in another query parameter called method that would allow them to get around that and actually use a post to send you data, but say that it is a post, an HTTP post. But what I actually mean is a put, if you want. Next thing, security, right? Promise you one slide, all right? Security. Remember that web services must be stateless. That's all that extremely important. If you have state carried over from one request to another one, you're just making your life difficult and you're not RESTful, right? This means that no cookies, no sessions, right? Which implies that the client must send you their credentials every single time they hit an endpoint of your API, every single time. This would make your life extremely easy. If you are behind the load balancer, you don't have to use session stickiness or any of that business right there. You just have a load balancer, and it doesn't matter what service they end up in, you're good, all right? So you don't want to have that. And you have multiple options, of course. If you decide to just stick with HTTP security, you want them to preemptively set the authorization HTTP header, which would have their username and password with every single request. Basic, which is a base 64 encoding, or digest, which is, I believe, just like an MD5 hash, every time. Make sure that this thing is very insecure, so you might wanna consider using HTTPS for that. All right. If you are brave, and I highly recommend this, you want to use OAuth. I believe there are a few presentations in Java 1 about OAuth. One, I think, was in this room in the previous session. I guess you missed that one. But testing your API. There are two main projects that actually stand up if you want to test your web services, right? And the first one is the Spring REST template. And that's a user over there. This thing is very nice in the sense that it would conveniently not only allow you to actually fire those requests here and there, but it would actually marshal from XML and from JSON stuff for you into Java objects, so you don't have to do any of that code and you don't have to monkey around with doing that yourself. But the coolest one is Rest Assured. It's an open source project from JWay. I apologize. This is the slide I was talking about. I apologize from the people in the back, but this is straight from their homepage, so you didn't miss much. that would allow you to say, literally, in a way, in an API that is very fluent, given authentication basic with username and password, expect status code 200 when you get or post to /secured. And it would fail your JUnit test on that basis or pass it. It's great. It's literally like a one-liner that sounds very much like English, right? Versioning, extremely important. One of the slides that we said is, once you go public, APIs are forever. You couldn't change them, right? People do it differently. They do it, most of them do it this way, which I extremely hate because it says like API/v1 and it just messes up this whole concept of that. The slash is supposed to signify hierarchy, v1. Some people would use Facebook, I think uses the question mark equals v1, which is horrible as well. And it was like different, like v1.1, you know, there's these guys, I think Twilio uses this. It would actually have like the date. It was weird. I was like, what the hell is this? And they actually would use like the date to version their APIs. You might have a different opinion, but I really don't like that. What you want to make sure is you want to make sure that this is not optional, that whoever's using your API explicitly specifies what version of that particular API that they use. You don't want this to be optional under any circumstances. My favorite way is actually to use vendor-specific MIME types, all right? You could go online and register, I think, for free, an actual MIME type that is specific to your API or specific to your application. This is my JSON. This is my MIME type, my JSON of VND for vendor polymathic coder dot address book specific to the address book application that we're building, plus JSON. All this says that this is the JSON of polymathic coder, and I actually forgot you include v1 here or v2 or v3 to say, and that's how you would version your API. So every time somebody hits your endpoint, you know, you read that accept header, and it's your specific MIME type, and then you say, and you read the version off of it, and then you would direct them to the controllers in your code or the resources of your code that are there to handle that particular MIME type, that particular JSON, right? Documentation. We all hate it, but we must have it. What to document first? Documentation. When you go online, you know, Twitter by far has the best documentation I've ever seen out there. But what to document is extremely important. Think about it from a client's standpoint. What does this guy need to do to call one of my endpoints? And then you would document that. But you also want to include some kind of metadata to kind of let them know what's the purpose and what kind of operation it is carried by that particular endpoint. And you say the endpoint itself, you know, give it a name, some description, whether there is a prerequisite or not. The endpoint that tells the guy to pay the guy, its prereq is that he completed the immigration paperwork and whatever it is before. So you would say that this is a prereq. If you're HATEOAS or like HotEos or whatever that thing is, however that thing is pronounced, if you're that, that would be as a link in your body as well, just to tie it back to that. And actually the request and response. What does request and response mean? Request. You want to give him your URI. You want to give him the path parameters that are included in that URI. By path parameters, I mean /user /abdel, that say that abdel is actually a variable of the guy. Query parameters, any query parameters that you're supporting, whether they're for pagination, they're for partials, whatever it is, you want to explicitly state them there. Tell them whether they are optional, non-optional. Give them any defaults when they actually don't use them. Tell them whether they have defaults for them or not. You want to actually document the HTTP method. You want to document the HTTP headers that you need set, content type, accept, the authorization as well. And you want to document the body. What's the object in that body, the schema, and give him actually give him some sample. I'm going to show you a very nice demo in a little bit, but of a documentation, a model of documentation in a little bit. So a response, you want to document two things. In case of a success, what is the HTTP status code, and also the body, and the failures. The different HTTP status codes that you have in the failures, the different errors, and the bodies that they come with. In case of documentations, refer to the big guys. They have outstanding documentation. But I would point you to this open source projects, IO docs from Mashery. That is very nice. So I'll just show you a little example over there of what I'm talking. Oh, this is horrible. What I'm talking about. So what you end up with things like that. A documentation that is very interactive. If you want to get a DVD list of top rentals from Rotten Tomatoes, all right, you would just go right here and click on it. It will drop down. These are all the parameters right there, and this is the country, and you'll get to try it. Sorry about this. You'll get to try it, and it will actually go and make the call in the background. I don't have Wi-Fi. Sucks. Sorry, guys. No internet. Blame Oracle. So, well, actually, blame me. I didn't authenticate. But anyways, you can go and do get top rentals, and then you get to try that particular API. Oh, I see. I see. I'll just put it away. I'll put it away. That's fine. So I have about 7 minutes right now. We're almost through the slides, and I'll have some time for questions right after. So the link's on the slides as well. So how RESTful is your REST? A lot of you walked into this talk to get an answer for this question. Again, the Richardson's maturity model as a reference, that should tell you where you actually stand, whether you're level 1, 0, 3, or even if you want to take it and before. There's also this balance between being dogmatic versus pragmatic. And in I think English common law, there's this concept of the reasonable man. And by reasonable in law, it means that the concept of being reasonable is very relative, and that you take into consideration people who are in similar situation, people who are within your space of technology or product, and what is the custom and what is the usage as well. And a lot of these things like paginations and all of these things are just custom. That's what, however you choose them to be, and however whichever makes the most sense to you, whichever you think would be easier and more intuitive with the user, you should go with. Questions? If you have, I'll open it for questions right now, but if you'd like access to the slides, I will try to put up some sample code online in the next maybe few weeks, and I will tweet it. So if you follow at Polymathic Coder, you'll get access to that one. Or you can talk to me afterwards. If you're not a Twitter guy, you can give me your email and they can get back to you. So I'll open it for the floor for any questions. And if not, have a good Java 1. Any questions? Thank you. I have one. Oh, IO docs. Yeah, I love that thing. Hold on. Where is it? Too quick. There it is. You literally just go and put up some JSON, define some JSON, you'll get that nice drop downs and all of those things. You just pretty much go, and it's very declarative and very nice. Thank you, guys.